So, I'm going to break a little bit from the vague brand I have going on with this channel and class things up a little bit, at least for this week, because I want to talk about one of the finest pieces of television ever made. Columbo is hardly an obscure show, being critically acclaimed over the 3 decades it remained on air, and winning 13 of the 39 Emmys it was nominated for. Even still, I wish to frame this video as a recommendation for this show, an explanation of why it's so great, and then to tell you that you should be watching it right now. But since there's already multiple videos like that on this site made by significantly more talented content creators, I'm going to make my video stand out by discussing the 3 different perspectives you can use to view this show in order to add to the enjoyment. If you're as into the quirky detective murder mystery genre as I am, you might initially be caught off guard when starting this show. Columbo seems in many ways to fit snugly into this subgenre. The number of random characterizations, little quirks, and habits the character Columbo displays is on par with many other show leads. But as brilliant of a character as Columbo is, he is not the element of the show which will stand out first to a genre-savvy viewer. Now, the first thing you'll probably notice about this show is that it's not a quirky detective murder mystery show, because there isn't a murder mystery. The first act of every episode introduces the murderer to the audience, usually shows why they want to murder their victim, their step-by-step plan to murder their victim, and then their plan to cover it up, done in a way which should make it impossible to blame on them. For example, in Any Old Port in a Storm, Adrian Garcia is a wine snob and partial owner of a vineyard with his brother,
my dear little brother,
who, to his dismay, has gone behind his back to sell the vineyard to a company that doesn't quite meet Adrian's standards.
The Marino brother. The Marino brothers! 69 cents a gallon, Marino brothers. They don't make wine. They don't even make good mouthwash.
In a moment of rage, Adrian strikes his brother, rendering him comatose. Adrian, realizing his opportunity, drags his brother into the wine cellar, where he will have enough air for a day or two before suffocating. Then Adrian leaves for a week-long trip, leaving the house empty, and upon returning, dresses his brother, who died while he was out of town, giving Adrian a rock-solid alibi. Adrian then dresses his brother up in his diving gear and tosses his body into the ocean. When his brother's body is discovered, it looks like he hit his head and then drowned deep underwater, and the autopsy shows that his time of death was at a point in time when Adrian was across the country spending absurd amounts of money on wine.
Ladies and gentlemen,
$1,000.
$1,000 I have. That is a fair beginning. Now, let's have an auction. $1,000 on bid for this rare and priceless bottle. $2,000.
$2,000.
$2,000. And to you, sir, $3,000 I have.
This story structure fundamentally changes how the narrative is constructed. It's not unusual for us to spend between 20 and 30 minutes with just the murderer before Columbo even shows up. The original TV movie that is Columbo's pseudo-pilot, we go 32 minutes into a 90-minute movie before Columbo walks on camera, and until then, there is absolutely zero indication that we're waiting for one of the 2 leads to show up. This means, for the first part, or even for the full episode, the murderer will act as the main character. This creates a really interesting example about how perspective and framing is related to how we, the audience, empathize with characters. The order in which we are introduced to characters and the amount of time we spend looking at things through their perspectives allows us to understand and forgive certain behaviors. A lot of famous characters are questionable people that make ethically dubious choices, but we still like and enjoy watching them because we become invested in their stories. Also, this isn't some moral judgment against characters with questionable morality. I don't believe characters need to be paragons of humanity to be empathized with. I'm merely making an observation about how our willingness to empathize with characters is greatly related to how they are framed in narrative. Which is good, because Columbo's characters are very much not paragons. Besides their frequent crimes against fashion, they are also, by definition, murderers. This is a fantastic outfit. I just worry he was just a little too subtle with the collar. Occasionally they may have more sympathetic reasons for killing, they're usually out for profit. Despite this, due to the fact that we start the story from their perspective, it is super easy to get invested in their stories. Tension comes from their plans hitting a snag and them needing to quickly adapt. And despite yourself, you become impressed with just how sophisticated their plans can be. If you've ever seen Death Note, it has a similar appeal. Sure, the lead is an ass you know should be taken down, but on the other hand, you just get so engrossed in their scheme that you just want to see what they'll do next. So as Columbo starts to close in and begins to unravel their stories, you're on the edge of your seat wanting to know what they'll do next. In the episode Blueprint for a Murder, Elliot Markham has a devious scheme to make Columbo believe he has already buried the body under a part of a building that has started construction. So when Columbo digs up that pillar and doesn't find a body, he will be humiliated, but also meaning afterwards he can really hide the body there, safe in the knowledge that the police would never be willing to look there again. This is such a diabolically clever scheme that you almost want him to succeed just for thinking it up. Columbo's rogue gallery is full of people like this. They are smug, swarmy assholes with hugely inflated egos, but they're played with such skill and charm that they become delights to watch.
Do we really need it, Mr. Corsini?
Nobody really needs a $5,000 bottle of wine, Karen. I just don't want anybody else to have it.
And this was made possible by Columbo's absolutely astonishingly talented set of guest stars playing killers. Leonard Nimoy, Donald Pleasance, Johnny Cash, Dick Van Dyke, Janet Leigh, Ruth Gord, and freaking William Shatner, to name just a few, all bring stellar performances to this show. But special attention must be given to Jack Cassidy and Robert Culp, who both performed the murderer 3 times, and Patrick McGonaghy, who played the killer 4 different times. All 3 of these men gave such incredible performances and had such a genuine chemistry with Peter Falk that their scenes became magnetic to watch.
I think I've got it. It took me a minute to connect with the word chick.
My personal favorite is Jack Cassidy, who has such a unique charm to him that means you never get sick of him. I'm sure if he hadn't passed away so tragically young, he would have been back many more times. Playing a likable asshole is such a fine tightrope to walk, and time and again, Columbo's killers managed to do it, filling the scenes with such swarmy assholes, but presenting the story from their perspective, allowing you, the audience, to get invested in their stories and feel their anxiety as the detective slowly closes in. The unique format of Columbo allowed this to work, where most shows of a similar style often will have weak killers who are often just small background characters until their identity is revealed. Columbo's different. Each episode we get a new engaging lead to follow on their road to ruin. But they're so engaging to watch that you don't even know if you want them to get caught sometimes. And in some episodes, literally until seconds before the end of it, it looks like they just might get away with it. If the killers are so consistently engaging to watch, the show would need a pretty charismatic lead in order to compete with that. And luckily, the show has that in spades, with the endlessly charming Peter Falk. A lieutenant who, on the surface, appears to be near incompetent levels of bumbling, who literally doesn't seem to know if he's coming or going,
I was thinking...
and who rambles on more than me talking about Scooby-Doo. But this is all an act used to disarm the killers in an unearned sense of ease that allows them the chance to slowly give out more and more small details till they start to contradict themselves, which Columbo can then use to spring traps on them as the conversation goes on, which perfectly mirrors the real-world truth that you should never talk to cops. Despite outward appearances, Columbo is no fool. His observation skills and his memory are second to none. He is very good at reading people, and can almost instantly spot the killer within seconds of meeting them. This is where the true brilliance of this show lies. See, I buried the lead a bit earlier when I said this show's not a murder mystery. It's not. We, the audience, know who the killer is, and Columbo knows who the murderer is. But that doesn't mean the show doesn't have an element of mystery to it. Columbo is part of the slightly less common spin-off of the whodunit genre, known as a How Catch 'Em, which, as the name of the genre implies, is an inversion of a whodunit. A typical whodunit will say, here is a murder that seems like it was impossible to commit. Now you, along with the detective, are going to try to solve it. It's your typical murdered in a room that was locked from the inside and it has no windows.
The bodies of 2 dead wrestlers were found this morning at Madison Square Garden. They were lying in the middle of the ring. One had been stabbed and the other drowned.
Absolutely not.
Oh, they say there's a logical explanation, but they really need
Grady,
your help.
tell her, dear.
The How Catch 'Em is the inverse of this, showing you the seemingly perfect murder and cover-up. And now you, along with the detective, are trying to figure out the mistakes the killer made along the way. And while you might think this sounds like a boring mystery because you already know everything, this is deceiving. Because the first time you watch the episode, you're so engaged with what the murderer is doing that, like the killer, you can easily overlook mistakes they make, leaving you to try and guess how Columbo can possibly catch them. Admittedly, there's a handful of episodes in the later seasons which cheat a little bit and don't show you everything. These episodes feel a little cheap because of that, but all of the good episodes, and definitely all the episodes in the early seasons, give you all the information you need to outthink the killers if you're paying attention. This inverted mystery has a different feel and type of clues that are important than your typical murder mystery. But if you're someone who's really into a good mystery that plays fair and doesn't make the mystery impossible to solve unless you have highly specific information that only the detective could have, then I can't recommend this show enough. Something else that's made possible by the inverted mystery format that just can't be done in a more conventional murder mystery is the mind games. In a whodunit, you can't focus on the killer more than anyone else without giving away the game. But in Columbo, that's not an issue, which means that as soon as Columbo sniffs out the killer, he can stick to them like glue, slowly whittling away at their defenses. His usual technique is to try and befriend them and ask for their opinions on the case, playing the fool and giving them all the rope they need to hang themselves with. And because the show brings in such high caliber actors, the two verbally sparring with each other is a joy to watch every time. If we were to view these confrontations through the lens of a combat metaphor, then the average Columbo killer is a skilled and composed martial artist, practiced and a formidable foe, and Columbo would be the drunken master, bumbling, mumbling fool that seems like a complete goof until suddenly you see where he was going with each move, and you realize he has outclassed his opponent every time. Peter Falk was famous for ad-libbing lines and doing random things with props in the room to completely throw his screen partner off their pace. At the moment he's about to reveal the most damning piece of evidence, he will get distracted by the most random thing and start a whole tangent, forcing the murderer to bring the conversation back on topic, revealing just how under their skin he's gotten.
I didn't expect you back so soon. Oh. Don't want to forget this. You have a real green thumb, sir.
What?
This African violet of my wife's, you know there's actually a flower growing out of there. Now, I don't know what you did, but whatever it was, that's a miracle.
Lieutenant, it's been a trying evening, and I'm quite distressed. Now, will you please take your African violet and get out of here?
Columbo is an expert at being charming, yet at the same time, annoying to the murderer, who considers him more than a little beneath them. In fact, I think there's something else to this, which is worth talking about. I took off my trench coat because I was trying to look like Columbo, but then I realized you can only see me from here up, so honestly, what even was the point? Anyways, I made a lovely cup of tea, so now we can continue with the video. Where were we? Oh yes, propaganda. So, Columbo is part of the police genre, which, as a whole, is facing reevaluation as propaganda, or copaganda, if you prefer, and I do. This is happening in light of the problems with police being more widely acknowledged. As for where Columbo falls on the copaganda gradient, I'd say somewhere in the middle. It is in no way interested in examining the problems that come from police officers, but at least it does not overly glamorize the police. The only time that there's a superior officer to Columbo that's an actual character in the show is because he is that episode's murderer. In general, Columbo is presented as the only police officer with any amount of competency, and none of the officers that show up in the show besides him are able to accomplish anything. Columbo is different from your standard police procedural in that it doesn't have him going up against the mob, or street crime, or drug dealers, so it manages to entirely sidestep the problem that a lot of procedurals have, where they'll only cast non-white actors to play mobsters, street criminals, and drug dealers. So while non-white actors are still uncommon in this show, since, 70s TV, at least when they do show up, their roles go beyond just criminals. Instead, Columbo exists in an idealized world where cops actually serve to hold politicians and rich capitalists accountable to the law. It also exists in a world where cops love their wives instead of beating them at twice the national average. But while this show is unable to deal with the problems of cops in its narrative, it does dip its toe lightly into themes of classism. Columbo is presented as thoroughly middle class, with very little extra income. He wears the same shabby coat and drives the same beater car for the entire 3-decade run of the show. He's constantly presented as disheveled, overworked, and unkempt. He's a sorry sight that seems to run on about 4 hours of sleep every night.
You're hungry and tired, I can see that.
Well, the fact is I didn't sleep last night, and I'm plenty tired.
Oh, I am sorry. Would you wait here?
And his adversaries are socialites, millionaires, wealthy capitalists, and people at the top of their field. Not necessarily the top 1%, but fairly comfortably in the top 5%. They are impeccably dressed, are sophisticated speakers, and have friends in high-up places. But despite this, every single time, Columbo outclasses them. Not just by outsmarting them, although he does, but mainly just through being a pure gentleman. He is kind to a fault, not shy to compliment them, and when isn't dealing with the killer, he is much better at toning down his mannerisms to be quite comforting. It's simple perhaps, but it's never not delightful to watch this humble middle-class man take down these conceited rich assholes who always underestimate him. Columbo has a knack for softballing a few questions before hitting them with his finisher, where he reveals one bit of information not so easily dismissed, where the killer realizes they are under suspicion.
Isn't it funny the way people react under the stress of a situation? I wasn't talking about you, sir. No, I was talking about Miss Johnson now.
I beg your pardon?
Miss Johnson. The girl that came in here to pick up an itinerary. I happened to hear that mentioned when I was sitting out there. So she came in, and now she walked out without it. See, here it is, sir. You see, it's right here on your desk with her name on it.
Well, we were making a number of additions to the itinerary. I suppose she forgot it. You're correct about one thing, Lieutenant. These campaigns are a lot of pressure. Lots of pressure.
Sure they are, sir.
And after they realize they're under suspicion, well now, the real battle can begin. This is usually done over several different confrontations. As Columbo keeps getting closer and closer to what they did, Peter Falk describes this chase as like being nibbled to death by a duck. Near the end, the killer will often respond with anger, trying to distance themselves from Columbo, and complaining to his superiors until finally he has enough to bring them in. But sometimes with his cooler customers, we'll have the scene. And it's a fantastic scene every time. And the scene is, I know you know I did it, but you'll never prove it. These are so good. The verbal sparring, the willingness to walk right up to the edge of admitting what they did without stepping over the edge. And it's in these scenes where Columbo becomes closest to breaking character and revealing just how devious a man he is. God, these scenes are so good. A personal favorite is the confrontation between Columbo and Bart Kepler in Double Exposure, where how well Kepler is doing in his golf game is directly tied to how well he is getting away with murder.
Golf ball.
Oh, did I ruin your shot?
No, just a little.
No, sir, not too much. Nothing except that you do know her. Oh, that's not bad, Doc. I mean, it's not far, but it's straight.
Lieutenant, you're bluffing.
No, I'm from Homicide. I'm not from the Vice Squad. Uh-oh. Not a bad one, huh, Doc?
Yes, that's a bad one.
There are just so many good lines.
I was told that all of the testimony was unanimous. Everyone in the room swore they saw me there. Is that true?
Yes, sir.
Has someone changed their testimony?
No, sir.
No, they haven't. Well, when they do, we'll be able to pursue this fascinating line of speculation. Ah, here's my ball. There it is. I'll just toss it out a bit. And no one will ever know.
I would play the entire scene if I could, but unfortunately, copyright laws.
As far as I know, a court of law in this country still requires some kind of evidence, don't they?
It's right, Doc. And I don't have any.
I don't see any. Do you?
Not enough to convict.
I can't see how. So we'll just have to let it go at that for the time being, since we don't have any alternative, and I really can now get on with my game.
Nice shot, Doc.
Yes.
For a while there, I thought I was going to spoil your game.
Not a chance, Lieutenant.
Even better still is the final pop. It's the moment that Columbo lays out his entire case, reveals he knew the entire time, and reveals one final piece of evidence that can nail the murderer. Often, this moment is so good that they don't even bother with any other wrap-up with the episode. It just ends right there with a look of horror on the murderer's face, with the knowledge they have been bested. I'm not going to show any clips here to prove my point. I feel like that is the equivalent of showing who the murderer is in your more traditional mystery. But there are some very clever gotchas in this show that are definitely worth watching for. By looking at things through Columbo's perspective, this show works as an excellent mystery. And it's one where the writers can never cheat because we already know all the relevant information.
There's just one more thing. I saw you doing.
Okay, so this is going to be a very unconventional reading of the show, almost certainly not intended by the writers, but I don't know. I think authorial intent is overrated. Also, I do have reasons to support this perspective. So, a traditional reading of Columbo will have him figuring out who the killer is very quickly and having a general idea of how they committed the crime, most of the episode's runtime is still devoted to him just proving this. But he's still human. It's a process. He takes some time to figure out all the details. But from this perspective, Columbo knew all from the beginning. And perhaps his knowledge is even a little supernatural. He still needs to prove it, but he knows all. Maybe he just happens to be in the neighborhood crouching in the bush at the time of the crime. Maybe he's psychic. Maybe he's a trickster god, here to make murderers confess to their crimes, but he's not into torture or anything like that, so he just sort of annoys them into confessing.
Oh, that's just not possible.
Lieutenant, that's a very expensive desk.
Oh, excuse me.
All valid, but the point is that he at all times knows everything and is just fucking with the murderer until the end.
Because I think it'd be fun to be neighbors for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
This view is not inconsistent with how Columbo is presented. There is, at times, an almost mythical presentation to his character. He appears from the shadows when needed, then vanishes as soon as the case is solved. Little is known about him outside of his job, which he appears to be working at all times. Always on duty. Despite how much he talks about his friends and family, little is actually known about him. We don't even know what his first name is, and we also don't know how much of a liar he is. We do know he's a liar, and we know his foolish exterior is to a degree a performance. We just don't know how much. Some fans theorize that everything is a lie, up to and including his wife.
If it's not too much trouble, my wife would love to have your autograph.
Why, of course, Lieutenant. That's no trouble at all. And when the time comes, I would sure love to have her vote. What's her name?
Mrs. Columbo.
When asked about this, Volk had a slightly more toned-back response.
I disagree. I think he does have a wife. But I'm not sure how many relatives he has. It's very important that he appear harmless to the adversary. And one of the easy ways to do that you would start out by saying, you know, my nephew, this kid is such an egghead, you know, he knows about giant snails. I didn't even know giant snails existed. Well, the other day, he was here and he was talking blah, 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 and before you know it, I didn't find out about the clue, the nephew did. But I would forget what I said the last time, whether it was a nephew or could have been a brother-in-law or a sister-in-law. So by this time, he's accumulated an army of relatives.
I tend to agree with him. I think the text of the show does too. I also don't think Columbo wants to be a cruel being, but he is far more self-aware about how annoying he is than most suspect, and he definitely plays it up to get heightened reactions from his suspects. I think the fun that comes from viewing Columbo as entirely knowledgeable and always holding all the cards is, despite how overpowered he is still ingeniously subtle and effective at getting under the killer's skin. Take this scene. Previously, while killing the episode's victim, the episode's killer got coffee poured on his hand, burning him, and it left a stain in the carpet of the office of the victim. He had also set up the dead body to look like his death was an accident, so evidence of a scuffle in the office could potentially be damaging to that setup. And when Columbo sees the burn on his hand, he says this.
Must hurt like the devil.
What's that?
That burn mark. That is a burn mark, isn't it? Yeah, that's a burn mark.
Yeah, I accidentally put my hand under the hot water this morning while I was shaving.
Yeah, they hurt like the devil. Yeah, the last time that happened to me, I spilled some hot coffee on myself.
Now, mind you, it's entirely possible that Columbo was just making conversation. He does say a lot of stuff just to disorient people because, you know, a coffee stain on a carpet and a burn on some guy's hand is not exactly damning evidence, which is why this scene doesn't really become relevant again. But if you accept the trickster god Columbo, then he absolutely said this just to fuck with the killer. And if you look at his face, it worked. Columbo is full of moments like this, where he'll say some small comment that makes you wonder just how much he knows, and how actively is he causing distress. And it's so funny to watch like this. Take this scene where a killer is trying to poison Columbo the same way he poisoned his original victim. Well, tense when viewed from the perspective of the detective or the killer, when viewed through the perspective that Columbo knows all and has switched the poison glass ages ago, and is drawing out this scene just to mess with the killer, this entire scene becomes hilarious. The thought that this smug asshole could ever outsmart the great Columbo is absurd, and the final reveal where Columbo lets the killer know he knew the entire time is fantastic.
I wouldn't, sir. Don't drink. You switch the openers again. But I switch the glasses. That's the poison glass, sir. The glass I was supposed to drink. I'll just keep this for the boys down in the lab. That's what they call proof.
Columbo goes from a mildly funny show to a hilarious one through a change in perspective that makes the show almost into a farce where Columbo plays with his victims until he's bored, making fools out of them before ultimately bringing them to justice. So if I had to guess, you'd either want to know what is the preferred way to watch this show, or want to know, is it really possible to enjoy this show in multiple different ways without the different perspectives invalidating each other? And I can answer both. I, for one, do not believe there is a best perspective to view this show from. I personally flip-flop between all three depending on which one most benefits the scene I'm currently watching. And surprisingly, no. This does not lower the quality of my viewing experience. Sure, these three perspectives can't all coexist, but I don't think that really matters, because you don't typically view a scene through all three at once. And I don't think it in any way impedes on the viewing experience to change your perspective depending on which the scene most benefits from. And if a scene is equally enjoyable from multiple different perspectives, well, that's fine. You can just rewatch certain episodes then, which is fine because, as I've said before, this show's fantastic. If you want to start watching Columbo, you can find it on all sorts of websites. You know the ones. If you want to watch it legally for some reason, it's on DVD, and you can also stream it on Peacock's streaming service. I would honestly recommend starting with the original made-for-TV movie and just working your way through in order of release. If you want to skip the duds, I'd recommend skipping these ones, but other than that, I'd really recommend watching all of them, some of them multiple times. But if you want some good ones to start off with, Season 2's A Stitch in Crime has Leonard Nimoy giving a chilling performance. Season 6's Fade into Murder has William Shatner absolutely hamming it up. Season 3's Double Exposure has one of the cleverest murder schemes. My personal favorite episode is Season 7's Try and Catch Me, just for how good Peter Falk and Ruth Gordon play off each other. And Season 1's Suitable for Framing has probably the best gotcha of the entire season, and I dare not spoil it for you. So yeah, what are you still doing here? Go! Watch! A traditional reading of Columbo still accepts that he's a very intelligent man, but
Hey, Misha. Hi, sweetie. Hi, Cat. You want it? Huh?
say hello.